I've said it before and I'm sure I'll say it again in the future. Australians love SUVs. But why? Passenger cars like sedans and wagons are typically nicer to drive and more fuel efficient. Well, these 4 SUVs behind me have something no sedan or wagon can offer: 7 seats.
These aren't true full-time 7-seaters though. Rather, they're more accurately described as 5+2s that offer 7 seats but on a part-time basis. These aren't for big families that need 7 seats all the time, rather those of us with a couple of kids who might need to bring some friends or family along for the occasional short trip.
Our quartet of contenders is led by the all-new Peugeot 5008, the latest model in the French brand's SUV expansion. Next up, the Skoda Kodiaq. This launched in Australia last year and it won praise for its polished presentation and on-road manners. Alongside those 2 Europeans, we have 2 Japanese entrants, the Honda CR-V and the Nissan X Trail. Both of these models added an extra pair of seats in the back for this generation. So let's find out which one of these 4 is number 1.
I'll be assessing this group on value, presentation, practicality and driving dynamics to decide which is the best choice for families in need of extra people carrying capacity. First up, which is the best value? We're testing the Peugeot 5008 Allure, which is the entry-level model in the French brand's lineup, but it is positioned as a more premium proposition. It's priced from $42,990 and comes generously equipped. 18-inch alloy wheels, keyless entry and ignition, dual-zone air conditioning, a 12.3-inch digital instrument panel, navigation, digital radio, Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, and wireless smartphone charging are all included. Safety equipment includes a surround view parking camera, adaptive cruise control, lane departure warning, and autonomous emergency braking. So while it's more expensive than its Japanese rivals here, there's plenty of goodies for the money. The Skoda Kodiaq 132 TSI 4x4 is priced at the same $42,990 as the 5008. For the money, you get much the same equipment as the Peugeot, but the Skoda does have larger 19-inch alloys and LED headlights with adaptive front light system. Safety is comprehensive too, with 9 airbags, forward collision warning, autonomous emergency braking, and multi-collision brake all standard. So just like the Peugeot, the Skoda may be pricier, but it still offers strong value for money. The Nissan X Trail STL 7-seater is the cheapest of these 4, priced from just $38,590, making it more than $4,000 cheaper than the European models. But it still comes reasonably well equipped for the money with 17-inch alloy wheels, keyless entry and ignition, leather accented trim, dual zone air conditioning, navigation, 6-speaker sound system, Bluetooth, digital radio and cruise control all included. In addition, there's surround view parking cameras, parking sensors, autonomous emergency braking, blind spot monitoring and rear cross traffic alert. The Honda CR-V VTI L is priced from $38,990, which positions it close to the Nissan and notably cheaper than the Peugeot and Skoda. What you get for that money is 18-inch alloys, keyless entry ignition, a power tailgate, leather upholstery and a panoramic sunroof, plus of course Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, navigation and Bluetooth. However, while the CR-V gets airbag protection for all occupants, front and rear parking sensors, and Honda's clever lane watch system that features a camera to cover the blind spot in the side mirror that displays on the infotainment screen, there are a couple of glaring safety omissions. Autonomous emergency braking, forward collision warning, lane keep and assist, and rear cross traffic alert are all missing and not even available as an option. Disappointing for a family vehicle. Next up, presentation and practicality. Which one of these 4s offers the most comfortable cabin for its occupants? The Peugeot has real wow factor inside thanks to a very stylish design and interesting combination of materials. Every element of the 5008 interior looks and feels nice, which pushes it into luxury car territory in my opinion. Peugeot's iCockpit concept, however, the small squared-off steering wheel and high-mounted digital instrument panel, is designed for better vision, but it won't be to everyone's taste as it requires some compromise in terms of where you position the steering wheel depending on your height. But overall, the Peugeot is the best presented car inside.
The back of the 5008 really impresses. For starters, it's got 3 individual seats rather than a bench or a compromised middle. It's also got these little handy tray tables that kids will love, mechanical sunblinds built into the doors, and its own air conditioning controls. And another thing is these seats will slide backwards and forwards to trade off some space in the rear. As for the boot, well, it's pretty generous in size as is, but you've got a pair of these seats hidden underneath the floor, stowed away out of the way, that pop up. And as an added bonus, if you just want to get rid of them for even more luggage room, you can pull these seats completely out of the vehicle.
While the Peugeot is genuinely pushing into luxury car space, the Skoda isn't too far behind. It's a very polished cabin with a premium look and feel to the materials, switchgear and infotainment system. There's also the so-called simply clever touches, like a pair of hidden umbrellas in the front doors and pop-out plastic door protectors.
Like the 5008, the Kodiaq is well equipped in the back here for kids. Not only do you have slide-in seats, but you've got some clever touches. You've got a power outlet down here and these really handy and really clever device holders, so you can put a smartphone or a tablet in there and keep your kids entertained for hours. You've also got sun blinds to keep the sun out of the eyes. But the problem I have with the Skoda's second row compared to the Peugeot's is this middle seat. It's a bit smaller, it's not a proper seat like it is in the 5008, and you have got a transmission tunnel down here on the floor that compromises your feet space. As for the third row, it's a generous sized boot that comes with a couple of more Skoda clever touches, like the ability to drop the second row seat from back here, a torch that's built into the side of the boot itself, and the third row seats pop up nice and easily. So all in all, it's yet another example of Skoda just doing all these clever things really well.
The Nissan may save you money, but you'll notice it when you climb aboard. The cabin is perfectly functional with good small item storage and an intuitive layout, but it lacks the style and the sophistication in terms of presentation and finish compared to the Peugeot and Skoda. The gap in terms of quality feels far greater than the $4,000 price difference. The 5008 and Kodiaq are simply in a different league. And it's the same story when you climb into the back seats.
The second row of the X Trail is a pretty basic affair. It's tight on space, the smallest of these four, and it's also the most basic in terms of what you're getting. There's only a set of air conditioning vents. There's no blinds in the doors. There's no outlets to charge any of your kids' toys or games. And the third seat here, the one in the middle, is pretty squeezy. The seats do slide, but you do need to slide them to access the third row. The X Trail does come with a pretty generous boot. It's a pretty sizable thing when you're not carrying people, but once the seats are up though, you do still get a little handy piece of underfloor storage here, which is a nice touch from Nissan.
The CR-V finds a middle ground between the basic Nissan and the polished Europeans. It's a nicely presented mid-size SUV with an easy-to-use layout and a nice fit and finish. It has excellent small item storage, with Honda's designers clearly thinking about how people use these vehicles. So there's plenty of room to stow your phone, your drinks, bags and so on.
Space in the second row of the Honda is pretty good. There's decent knee room, and as an added bonus, both the second and the third row get their own air conditioning vents. Plus, there's not one, but two USB ports, which is perfect for families on the move. Now, in the back, there is a large problem, and that is the seats don't fold flat, so you are compromising boot space. That is to fit a full-size spare under the back seat, which is handy if you plan on taking any long trips to the country. But of course, like all these, space is at a premium in the third row, but these are part-time seven-seaters, and with the air conditioning vents, kids will be reasonably happy back here and comfortable for short journeys.
Last but by no means least, which of these is the best to drive? Motivation for the 5008 comes from Peugeot's compact 1.6 litre 4-cylinder turbocharged petrol engine. It produces 121 kilowatts of power and 240 newton meters of torque. It's paired to a 6-speed automatic transmission that sends power to the road via the front wheels.
But while on paper that means the 5008 is lacking compared to its rivals, the reality is, in the real world, while it's missing a bit of actual power, it's also missing a lot of weight, because the 5008 is more than 200 kilograms lighter than the Skoda. The net result being that its actual power to weight ratio is quite good, so it feels pretty sprightly. There is a little bit of hesitation, so it feels a little flat maybe, right down low in the rev range. That's just that initial performance. But once you get going, and once you get that engine on boost, it feels more than up to the task of hauling this car along. As for the way it rides and handles, well, it's a bit of a mixed bag. It rides quite nicely. It's a little bit softer than the other cars here, so it's slightly less busy than, say, the Skoda, but the suspension can be a little noisy at times, which is disappointing. However, in terms of handling, I actually really enjoy driving the 5008. Again, that lightness comes through. It feels quite agile and responsive for such a big SUV. And this little steering wheel sort of factors into that. It just makes it feel a bit more, nimble than you'd ordinarily expect a 7-seat SUV to be.
Skoda has fitted the Kodiaq with its 2-litre turbocharged 4-cylinder petrol engine and mated it to a 7-speed dual-clutch transmission and all-wheel drive system. As the name implies, the Kodiaq's engine is tuned to produce 132 kilowatts of power and 320 newton-meters of torque.
Now those numbers mean the Kodiaq has the best performance of this quartet, and it feels it on the road. It's got really good performance, like really good pickup off the mark, and even the rolling acceleration feels strong. But as I mentioned with the Peugeot, it is a heavier car, but a lot of that weight is because it's all-wheel drive compared to the front-wheel drive of its competitors. Now, while that's great if the going gets slippery, the reality is, if you're going to use this as mum and dad's taxi around town, you don't need all-wheel drive. It's, quite frankly, overkill for a suburban SUV, which is what these four are for the most part. As for how it drives, well, I think the Kodiaq is one of the nicest SUVs on the market, but it probably shouldn't come as a surprise because this is effectively a Volkswagen Tiguan underneath, and that is a former Drive Car Review champion, so we are big fans of that car. Yes, this is a little longer, but the reality is it doesn't change the actual character of the Kodiaq, and it really feels quite responsive to drive. It's got really nice steering, and overall, I've got to say, the ride can be a little busy at times. It is quite firm because it is a Volkswagen product and they traditionally are a little firmer than average. But overall, I've got to say, this is a really pleasant SUV to be in. Certainly, Mum or Dad is going to be quite happy behind the wheel of this, even with 6 screaming children in the back.
Nissan has a 2.5-litre 4-cylinder petrol engine paired to a continuously variable transmission in the latest X Trail. It makes a modest 126 kilowatts of power and 226 newton meters of torque.
While it may be the only one to miss out on a turbocharger, I've got to say, I'm actually quite impressed with the way the X Trail performs on the road. It's got a decent amount of poke. You do have to put your foot down to access it, but once you do, it pulls along quite well given its on-paper specifications. But once you scratch the surface, you do find out why this is the cheapest car in this contest. It just feels a little behind its rivals in a lot of ways. The ride isn't quite as refined as the others. The steering's nice enough, but again, it lacks feel. And just its general on-road manners are not as polished as its competitors here. And it also has some other issues like a rather large blind spot on the A-pillar around the mirrors. It really can be quite tricky to see through at times, particularly when you're trying to turn across traffic. And the engine is a little noisy. At the end of the day though, you are saving a fair bit of money, so the driving experience might be a sacrifice you're willing to make.
Honda has added a turbocharger for this new generation CR-V. It's a small 1.5-litre engine, but with the help of forced induction, it produces 140 kilowatts of power and 240 newton meters of torque. Like the Nissan, it's mated to a CVT and only drives the front wheels.
It's an all-new engine compared to the old CR-V, and it feels a big step up over that old naturally aspirated unit. It's got a lot more performance off the mark. There's good low-down torque, even with the CVT, which traditionally they feel a little dull and doughy off the mark as the engine sort of flares with the way the transmission works. But this one I like. However, having said that, it doesn't feel quite as sprightly as the Peugeot. And again, I think that's just the weight coming into it. It feels just that little bit heavier, so it feels a bit slower to react. But in terms of its handling, I've got to say again, this latest generation CR-V is a big step forward over the old model. The old model had a deserved reputation for being a bit soft and not very exciting to drive, but Honda's managed to retain a lot of that comfort while still sort of sharpening everything up and making it a more responsive and nicer to drive SUV.
So which of these four is the pick? It's It's not an easy question to answer because all four do a good job of offering families an added level of practicality without stepping up to a full-size 7-seater. Ultimately, while the Nissan undercuts its rivals without missing out on space, its plain cabin and unrefined road manners mean it can't compete with the Peugeot and the Skoda. The Honda does a better job in terms of presentation and on-road, but even with the cheaper price, its lack of key safety features costs it a chance of victory.
Which leaves our two European contenders as the pick of this group. And by the narrowest of margins, my choice is the Peugeot 5008 for its family-friendly flexibility with a stylish twist.
Splitting the Peugeot and the Skoda is incredibly difficult, and both make fine choices for those looking for extra space. But the Peugeot's excellent presentation, punchy little engine, and flexible cabin give it an edge over the impressive Kodiaq.